diseases, I request the presence of our esteemed chairpersons, Dr. Lalita Shukla ma'am. Ma'am is a reputed senior gynecologist of our city. Please join us, ma'am. Dr. Taru Pandey ma'am is a renowned senior gynecologist. And Dr. Manoj Mathur sir is professor, Department of Medicine at Motilal Nehru Medical College. I would now request our esteemed speaker to join us on stage. Professor Anupama Kaul ma'am is professor in Department of Nephrology, SGPGIMS Lucknow. I would request Dr. Taru Pandey ma'am to please introduce our speaker.
Hello. Dr. Anupama Kaul, we welcome you and we are thankful for your presence here today. She is MBBS MD from KGMU Lucknow, DM Nephrology from SGPGI Lucknow, currently working as professor in the Department of Nephrology, SGPGI. She has numerous publications in various national and international journals to her credit. We are thankful for your presence here, ma'am.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Looking forward to hearing.
Thank you so much. I would just start with my talk and talking about the dilemmas and challenges we all face day in, day out with pregnancy and kidney disease. So a point of caution when the nephrologists are called during pregnancy is when a young female who is pregnant has UTI or she has a risk of AKI or a worsening of a underlying glomerular disease or new onset proteinuria or hypertension or a kidney disease with CKD and pregnancy in transplantations. So we all know physiologically the kidneys, as the mother carries on the pregnancy, there is going to be changes physiologically happening in their body. And one of them organs is the kidneys, which show physiological increase in size and dilatation. And there's increase in, what is important is increase in the increase in the cardiac output, there is vasodilatation, and subsequently what we observe here is that these women usually tend to have lower creatinines as compared to the normal individuals. They have a lower uric acids and they have a higher GFRs. And this is important when we deal with these patients, otherwise when we see them in pregnancy. The most important problem which a lot of obstetricians come across is pregnancy with UTI, which is almost in about 25% of the patients, and it is physiological because there is anatomical changes under the influence of the hormones which are there, and there is an independent risk to both the mother and the fetus as well. But what is important in pregnancy is the significance of asymptomatic bacteriuria in pregnancy. For all decades, it's been talked about whether do we treat them or non-treat them, but there are evidences to suggest that this does decrease the risk of acute cystitis and pyelonephritis in these pregnancies and also reduces the risk of the low birth weight babies and preterm infants. I would start with a case. This was a 27 years old female who had been GRAVA 1, Para 1 and L1, and she underwent a cesarean section on the 25th of December 2022. So she landed up with complaints of decreased urine output and shortness of breath, and there had been no prior history of any comorbid condition in the past. Her pregnancy test was tested positive. She was started on oral supplementations. She was vaccinated. She had good antenatal follow-ups. Her pressures and blood reports were nearly normal. She had a normal weight gain during the pregnancy. Which was interesting to understand that at 38 weeks of gestation, she had to undergo a cesarean section, and just 6 hours later, she had a drop in urine output which progressed to total anuria. She had respiratory distress, she had hypotension, and fortunate for her, she landed up in the emergency at SGPGI and POD1, and she was managed there. So when we looked into this lady, she was probably a pregnancy-related AKI, and what we thought was she was anuric, could there be a severe ATN or underlying thrombotic microangiopathy, which could be underlying atypical HUS, which was the etiology. Now, what is understandable to see that she had a normal creatinine just before her cesarean section. She had a hemoglobin of 8.9 and normal creatinine. But what happened on the day 0, we found that there was significant drop in her hemoglobins. Her TLCs were high and the platelets had dropped down. But her creatinine had risen. There was a rise in the OTPTs. So as she landed up in his emergency in the SGPGI, we thought of a possibility. See, what is happening in this lady? There's this young lady who has had normal pregnancy. Suddenly, one fine day, she has a cesarean section. She lands up in the emergency with an illness which is after the pregnancy is over, and she has totally anuric. So a lot of things come into your mind as we discuss, could be sepsis, DIC happening to her, or there's something else which is going to take place in this lady, which is important to be looked into. And that I'm going to discuss in few further slides. So what we interestingly saw that from the hemoglobin of 9.8, she had gone down to 6.1, the TLCs were rising, and there were platelets which were dropping down. Her OTPTs were rising. There was evidence of hemolysis. She had LDHs which were high, the retis were dropping, becoming higher, and the schistocytes start appearing in the urine. And in the blood, and what was interesting that urine showed 1+ protein and about 10 to 12 RBCs. So we had to manage her. We were still in dilemma, what to do. We managed her with inotropic supports. We gave her optimization, her renal replacement therapies, did other investigations. Her ultrasounds didn't show any retained products of conception. Vaginal swab cultures were sent. And understanding that she was anuric, she was not making any urine, and in the backdrop of a microangiopathic hemolytic anemia, a strong possibility of thrombotic microangiopathy as a cause for pregnancy-related AKI was kept in her. And we started her on plasmapheresis. Interestingly, we did send her complements as well as the anti-CHF antibodies. And over the period of time, if you could see, within a span of next 2 weeks, she opened up and started making good urine output. And the creatinines, which she was initially dialysis dependent, became dialysis independent as well. So by POD12, she was opening up. And what was interesting to see, the anti-CHF antibodies tested to be positive. See, what is interesting here is that though we had evidences of infection, her TLCs were rising, patient coming in total anuria is an important cause to think about this problem of anti-phospholipid, anti-CHF antibodies and the other autoimmune mechanisms. Since she had no complete recovery, so we were thought of biopsying her. There was evidence of TMA, and we did treat her with steroids. So we were clear that we were dealing with atypical HUS, which was anti-CHF related, and she had pregnancy AKI. Over the period of time, in a span of next 12 months, she did recover. She didn't recover completely. She had a creatinine 1.4, and her repeat anti-CHF antibodies were negative. So interesting to understand, why do these young women during pregnancy land up with acute kidney injury? Why are they having more frequencies to have AKI? Are we going to think beyond the convention of causes sepsis, ATN, drugs, and what are the prognosis? So looking back into the definitions of AKI, as we talked about, AKI is defined by the rifle as well as the Akin criteria to based on, as we still, Dr. Bhadoria had rightly said, to look into the urine output and the creatinines. So what is important here to understand, a marginal increase in creatinine. See, we just as I started off my conversation, I said there should be a rise of creatinine. The creatinines are usually lower down in the pregnancy, and there is a rise of creatinine, which may be subtle, but is important here as well. The urine outputs could be dropping because there could be underlying pain, the post-operative phase, or the preeclampsia, and the conventional markers don't hold true for pregnancy as such. The timing of AKI in pregnancy is variable. It can start from the first trimester with septic abortions to cortical necrosis in the third trimesters with other causes as well. See, the placenta plays an important role both in diagnosing the underlying kidney disease, because it's been seen in chronic kidney disease patients who have pregnancies that the placental insufficiency and the podocyte injury go hand in hand. So when we looked into our data about preeclampsia and starting plasmapheresis early versus late in patients with pregnancy-induced thrombotic angiopathy, the response to therapy was much better in patients who were started early within 72 hours. So why is these group of patients tending to have a unique presentation of AKI? And one of the dreadful problem is the cortical necrosis, which tends to happen to these women. And almost 8% of our population did show, because there's so much of vasodilatation happening into this. A small injury can be very significant in these women and then lead to cortical necrosis. The second problem which happens in pregnancy is the complement dysregulation, which gets activated. We know that during the pregnancy, the complements are activated, but the complement regulators within the placenta does maintain the pregnancy. However, the dysregulation in them can lead to implantation failures. We can have preeclampsia and preterm death. It's been also seen that patients with HELP and preeclampsia have been shown to have important dysregulating mechanism of complement. When we look into women who have microangiopathic anemia, thrombocytopenia, organ dysfunction, four things should come into mind. Are we dealing with TTP? Are we dealing with HELP? Are we dealing with complement-mediated TMA and the APLA as well? So the most important thing which is important from a nephrologist's point of view is the occurrence of the complement dysregulation, which gets triggered with small things like a bleeding and infection, or even during separation of the placenta. These triggers can actually trigger the underlying genetic predisposition in these women, and therefore the literature clearly says that these women tend to have underlying dysregulation, and which can manifest during the post-pregnancy. So how do you evaluate these women? We know that when these women may present in the post-pregnancy period with hypertension, anuria, and though a lot of possibilities come into mind, we should look for the DICs, the PT-INRs are usually normal in patients who have TMA in the backdrop. We should look for SFLT, PIGF ratios, because preeclampsia is one of the differentials which come into this condition, although the degree of renal failure is not that marked. We should also look for the TTP, which has the NNTS13 levels should be assessed, and of course the autoantibodies and gene sequencing is important. The mainstay of treatment is plasmapheresis, and of course diclizumab has come way, which helps in blocking the activation of terminal pathway. But however, when the autoantibodies is there, we might have to give immunosuppression in them. What is physiologically going wrong in pregnancy-related TTP, which is a milder form of renal injury which happens with women? You see these women in convention, normal pregnancies also have a lower ADAMTS13 levels. And when these women who already have a lower levels, and with the pregnancy pulling around, there is the increase in the wall-building liver factor, they become larger molecules, they get involved, they activate the complement pathway, and then subsequently cause the ischemia and infarctions. So the treatment is for a congenital TTP, we first frozen plasma, and if there's an immune-mediated injury, we may need immunosuppressions as well. When we looked into our data of biopsy-proven AKI, and we found that a large of these portion of the patients did have underlying pregnancy into HOS in nearly about 30% of the patients. And since ours is a referral center, almost 93% of these patients were dialysis dependent. And what was interesting to see when we looked into these biopsies, a huge number, almost 55% had cortical necrosis by the time they came to us, and the TMA was an important cause for them. When we looked into the patients who recovered and not recovered, we found the dialysis presentation and preeclampsia were some of the risk factors which actually were higher among the no recovery stage. The risk of oliguria and urea, which is very important, is the important cause for differentiating patients who recovered and unrecovered, and the clinical presentation of creatinine at the time of presentation. And in our series, we could get gelinostic evaluation in about 38 patients, and the most common presentation was the complement dysregulation. The death was about 9%, and recovery was about 21% in our group of patients. So this is another scenario which comes into when we look into, and as obstetricians, you always come, there is a female who is 35 years, and she has history of hypertension on ACE inhibitors, when to conceive, not to conceive. And another lady who's 36 years of age, who is primary gramida, has 9 months of amenorrhea, and suddenly she comes in, lands up in the emergency with uncontrolled hypertension and a headache and blurring of vision with dipstick 4 positive. What do you do? Here is a role of, as a team we work, is the hypertensive disorders of pregnancy is important both for obstetricians as well as nephrologists. When we were residents, when we grew over the years, we were taught that gestational hypertension actually was a transitory phase, and it just walked off and finished off once the pregnancy was over. It doesn't happen so. Now there is so much of data to suggest that despite women having hypertension during pregnancy, and there is a good population, roughly about 20% of them continue to have hypertension beyond the delivery and outcomes. Initially, they thought proteinuria was an important manifestation of patients with preeclampsia. Over the years, they have included other markers as well. But essentially, whether proteinuria is important in diagnosis for preeclampsia is not there. But then it was observed that women with extremes of stages of preeclampsia, only about 40% were not even showing proteinuria as well. So proteinuria is not important. But when it is there, it emphasizes the need for the severity of preeclampsia in the early onset preeclampsia, as well as the adverse effects on the perinatal outcomes. How do we differentiate? Well, if the hypertension appears before 20 weeks of gestation, is primarily going to be in chronic hypertension. And of course, if the hypertension happens beyond 20 weeks and with elevated uric acid and the angiogenic markers, we would be probably dealing with preeclampsia, or it is an overall phenomenon. This is quite common that midterm, kidney is going to have hyperfiltration, and which is well accepted. But we looked into our data that when we observed that these patients who had an abnormal response to this hyperfiltration tend to have poor outcomes in terms of maternal fetal outcomes. So this is important. We talked about proteinuria. So what happens to gestational proteinuria in large number of patients? We did see that way back in 1977, it was observed that even preeclampsia can present with nephrotic syndrome. In our data as such, we found that 1/3 of the women with preeclampsia did have nephrotic syndrome. But then the proteinuria and hypertension worsens in preeclampsia. So what do you advise these women? As we all know that 6 to 8 weeks the pregnancy, post-pregnancy period needs to be taken care of, but if they, after say about 8 weeks there is no proteinuria or no hypertension, well, we would say that they are at absolute low risk, but then of course we should guide them about maintaining their blood pressures, we should monitor their sugars, and of course the BMI, they all contribute to the worsening outcomes. Preeclampsia could be manifesting the underlying in kidney disease, which may worsen over a period of time. It is not only the mother which gets affected, it's actually the child. There have been data to suggest that cardiovascular outcomes, chronic hypertension, obesity, and cognitive dysfunction stand to happen among the children also who are born out of a preeclamptic labor. There is data to say that whether diet modifications, low dose of heparin would play a role. Well, they are data only. We need to have substantive evidence as well. What do you target? A target of what literature says 140/90, less than 140/90 is the blood pressure to be targeted upon. We shouldn't go further down. And it says that with the blood pressures are going higher up, we might have to terminate the pregnancy even before 34 weeks of gestation. One must understand that what is important is personalization of the therapy, which is important to the risk and stratification of these group of patients. This is another patient I would like to highlight. This is another situation which comes in a lot of patients we see that a primary comes to you with 17 weeks of gestation with proteinuria, and you have lower albumins and creatinines and there is heavy proteinuria. There is a lot of dilemma. Are we dealing with gestational proteinuria, or we are dealing with early preeclampsia in them, or are we dealing with an underlying flare of the underlying disease? And what investigation should we do? Do we biopsy? Should we give anticoagulation? And how do you manage the maternal fetal outcomes? These are issues which need to be discussed in detail. Nephrotic syndrome in pregnancy is a small chunk of population, and if it presents before 20 weeks of gestation, it's usually thought to be glomerular etiology. But however, if it presents beyond 20 weeks of gestation, it could be preeclampsia, which could be the etiology in them, and treatment varies accordingly. As I already discussed, preeclampsia is one of the important causes for proteinuria in these, and of course underlying glomerular disease do play a role. A good clinical assessment, one must look over the extrarenal manifestation, blood pressures, edema, and urine output, and of course quantification of proteinuria is also important. So in pregnancy, about a protein of more than 300 milligrams per DL of protein or a 24-hour collection stands out as proteinuria. It's important. We may not be able to collect 24 hours urine in a women. So what is data is suggesting that if a woman has proteinuria of more than 3+, the risk of having proteinuria would be less than 1.3%. So even a dipstick of 3+ would be significant in this period of time. This just has implications in maternal fetal outcomes. Patients, the degree of proteinuria, degree of renal failure, presence of hypertension all contribute. So for a best fetal and maternal outcomes, one must have a preserved renal function, minimal proteinuria, and no hypertension. So what do you do if the proteinuria starts happening before pregnancy? One must have a pre-pregnancy counseling. We must optimize the drugs, and she should have been, the induction phase must have been over. She should have been a minimal maintenance phase, at least 6 months both before the conception happens. We should stop the ACE inhibitors, stop the statins. Azathioprine, tacrolimus are safer in pregnancy, and low-dose aspirin and heparin can be used in them. However, when it happens during pregnancy is an issue, because what happens is that albumins do go down in pregnancy, the cholesterols do rise in pregnancy, and therefore one has to be cautious while making a diagnosis of nephrotic syndrome in pregnancy. All the issues, all the parameters need to be considered. Whether to biopsy or not to biopsy, it's important, because underlying disease has its implications, because literature says that beyond second trimesters, one must defer it till the postpartum period. And of course, and we may consider an empirical therapy for some time period, but definitely the underlying disease and what we are suspecting is important, because there is always increased risk of bleeding and technical difficulties in these patients, and of course has fetal complications as well. But when to biopsy these patients, when we are actually suffering, thinking of a worsening of renal failure, or when disease which doesn't have a serological marker may be important. But when they looked into literature among those pregnancies who had been biopsied, when we were thinking of clinical suspicion, almost 66% had a therapeutic change in their management when they were biopsied. But thromboprophylaxis is mandated. Infections are not common in these women. Renal injury does happen because of the lower intravascular compartment. Drugs are safer, steroids are safer, calcineurin inhibitors are safer in pregnancies. However, MMF and cyclophosphamide should be avoided. When we looked into our data of pregnancy-induced patients with pregnancy and nephrotic syndrome, we observed that they had worsening of hypertension and anasarca and IUGRs and preterm labor. And what was important to understand was that we did treat roughly about 5 patients during the pregnancy. 5 of them were treated with steroids. About 2 of them did not respond. We did give them CNI with steroids, and they did show improvement over the period of time. Chronic kidney disease is not uncommon to have pregnancy during their period follow-up. They do tend to have increased risk of worsening of hypertension, renal failure, and of course, they have issues with the fetal as well. But what is important to understand, what is the basic disease is important. If the patient has an underlying disease which is glomerular etiology, the risk of worsening is higher as compared to the interstitial disease. As there could be loss of renal functions, the proteinuria would worsen, and of course, there would be issues with the fetal as well. When we looked, see, pregnancy is a state for a woman to go to an obstetrician. So what I personally feel is pregnancy could be a checkpoint for these women to be diagnosed with CKD in the early developing period. When we looked into our data of pregnancy with chronic kidney disease and maternal fetal outcomes, all women who had GFRs of less than 60 ml did progress over the period of time, and therefore, a patient with preserved renal functions of creatinine of less than 1.4 mg would have good maternal and fetal outcomes. Pregnancy and transplantation, well, with the successful renal transplantation, there is return of normal hormonal fetal fertility rates within the women within 6 months. But there are issues in conceiving among these women as well. We must understand that women should have a stable low dose of immunosuppression. They should have a stable renal functions. They shouldn't have had any history of prior rejections, and they should have a conception roughly about a year after transplant. But then there are issues with the mother. There are drugs which are teratogenic. There is always an increased risk of preeclampsia and deterioration of renal functions as well. Fetal issues are also common. They tend to have preterm delivery, and they have low birth weight. We should choose the drugs. Antihypertensives, if the ACE inhibitors are there, we need to hold them back much before the pregnancy is conceived. Cyclosporin and steroids are safer. If the patient is on MMF, they have to be withdrawn much before they conceive, and because they have higher tendency to have malformations. We had about 11 patients among the 215 women who did go for transplant, but what was interesting to see that they did have a stable renal functions at the time of conceiving, and we did modify their immunosuppression over the period of time. But what was disheartening to see that they had higher IUGRs, and out of 2 of them had IUD and abortions as well. Over the period of time, what was very difficult to I explained to the mothers was that there was a worsening of GFRs, the creatinine did drop down after transplantation, and the proteinuria worsened. And among the 5 patients who had graft dysfunction, almost 4 lost the graft after the pregnancy, and that was disheartening. And when we looked at patients who had graft loss versus no graft loss, the baseline proteinuria, the baseline requirement of antihypertensives, preeclampsia, and post-pregnancy rejections were the important cause for it. So I would like to end by saying that God would not be everywhere, therefore He created mothers. And think and act, because self-care is not self-indulgence, it is self-preservation. And one must understand, healthy and happy mother can only give birth to a healthy, bright futures of the nation. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Anupma, for this extensive talk on pregnancy-related complications. In fact, actually, when we also do cesareans and the urine output gets less, it really puts us in a state. I mean, we just don't know what to do till the patient has normal output. And the importance of antenatal checkups, of course, you have touched upon. The thing is, quite a few times the patients have never had any checkups, and we are the ones to diagnose them with such problems. And then, of course, after the delivery, they go to a physician and they can conclude. Recently, I had a patient who was just 20 weeks. She came for the first checkup. She was absolutely asymptomatic, and her BP was 180 by 117. So I repeatedly took and it took me a long time to convince her to consult a physician. I don't know the follow-up, she's still admitted somewhere. But such cases normally are that was basically hypertension with pregnancy. It was the other way around, not exactly pregnancy with hypertension. And it was looking after the patient. I mean, the other complications which you have mentioned, I think we have to keep it in mind, especially when we examine the patient. Asymptomatic bacteria is also very important because patients are they're not very happy about getting a culture done initially. And then you have to stress the importance of having it done to prevent things like pyelonephritis or IUGR in later pregnancy. So thank you so much. It was very good and we really enjoyed the talk.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Elusive talk. We have young females who are patients of CAD and they want to start their family life. What are the parameters that have to be checked and what are the targets to be achieved before they plan for pregnancy?
So actually, I did mention, I was in a fasting reference, but definitely patients who have a creatinine which are lesser than 1.4 milligram percent do well post-pregnancy. Both the fetal and the maternal outcomes are good. But as the falling GFRs fall down, the outcomes, both maternal outcomes as well as fetal outcomes are poorer. So one has to be cautious. And what is the basic disease? Usually a glomerular disease progresses very faster. The hypertension worsens over the period of time. And the GFRs fall. So that is very disastrous. You may not have a successful pregnancy as well, and the mother loses his kidney as well. So one has to be cautious while managing these pregnancies. So usually we advocate that women who have a creatinine of less than 1.4 do well with both maternal and fetal outcomes.
Thank you, ma'am.
Anybody has a question to ask, ma'am? Please come forward. I don't think there are any questions from the audience. I don't think there are any questions from the audience. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am, for that elaborate presentation. Now I request our President Sir, Secretary Sir AMA, along with our Organizing Secretary to felicitate our speaker and chairpersons.